Bikers mess with the wrong soldier at an abandoned gas station. A stunning showdown of grit and bravery unfolds. The gas station's neon sign flickered in the stillness of the night, casting long shadows across the empty highway. Jake Winters, a man of few words but many scars, stepped out of his truck, his boots crunching against the gravel. The desert air was thick, carrying the faint scent of gasoline. He glanced at the horizon, where a faint rumble began to rise. Motorcycles, a lot of them. Jake checked his watch, his sharp instincts kicking in. Trouble was coming, but he wasn't one to flinch. Not anymore. The bikers pulled in, their engines roaring as they parked in a chaotic line. Their leader, a wiry man with a cruel smirk, dismounted first. Derek Chain's rider. Jake had seen his type before, bullies hiding behind a gang. Inside the station, Eddie's hands trembled as he watched from the counter. Jake caught the boy's eye, offering a slight nod. "Nice truck, old man," Derek sneered, sauntering over. "How about you hand over the keys before someone gets hurt?" Jake looked up, his gaze steady. "Not interested." Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know who you're messing with." Jake took a slow breath, his voice calm and deliberate. "And you don't know who I am. Walk away while you still can." The tension thickened as the gang surrounded Jake, their laughter masking a growing unease. Derek leaned closer, grinning. "Let's see if you're as tough as you act, old man." The gas station's lights buzzed overhead as the gang spread out, their heavy boots scuffing the concrete. Derek walked toward Jake's truck, running a hand along the hood like it already belonged to him. Behind him, the other bikers started grabbing snacks and drinks off the shelves, laughing and tossing items at each other. "Nice ride," Derek said, his voice oozing mockery. He turned to Jake, smirking. "Bet it's got some stories, huh?" Jake stayed silent, his gaze steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. But his stillness wasn't passivity. It was calculation. He was sizing them up. Inside the station, Eddie stood frozen behind the counter, his eyes darting to Jake for help. A loud crash broke the silence as one of the bikers, a burly man with a shaved head, knocked over a display of motor oil. "Oops," the man drawled, grinning. Jake's voice broke through the tension, calm but firm. "Pick it up." The biker looked at him, then back to Derek. The gang leader chuckled. "Don't worry about it, Skull. This guy thinks he's got a say here." Eddie's voice quivered as he tried to intervene. Sir, you're going to have to pay for that." The gang erupted in laughter, and Derek grabbed a bag of chips from a nearby shelf, tearing it open. "How much for these, kid? Oh, wait, on the house, right?" He threw a handful of chips onto the floor. Jake stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "That's enough." The laughter stopped. The bikers exchanged looks before Derek's smirk returned, wider this time. He took a step closer to Jake, his face inches away. "Or what, Grandpa?" Jake didn't flinch. "Or you're going to regret it." The gang roared again, but their leader's expression hardened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a quiet man in dusty boots. "You got a death wish, old man?" Derek growled. He gestured toward Jake's truck, and two bikers walked over, pulling knives from their belts. With loud hisses, they slashed Jake's tires, the air rushing out in angry bursts. Jake didn't move, but his jaw tightened. "What are you going to do now?" Derek sneered. "Walk home." Eddie's voice cracked as he tried again to stop them. You can't do that. This is private property." Derek turned on the boy, his eyes gleaming with malice. "And what are you going to do about it, huh? Call the cops?" He stepped toward the counter, slamming his fist down. Eddie flinched, backing away. Jake's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You're done here." Derek froze for a moment, then turned back to Jake, grinning. "Oh, you've got a mouth on you, huh? Maybe we should teach you some manners." Jake stepped forward, finally breaking his stillness. His eyes were cold, calculating, and unyielding. "I'm only going to say this once. Walk away while you can." The gang hesitated, the weight of Jake's words hitting them like a gut punch. For the first time, they saw something in his eyes that unsettled them. Experience, confidence, and a quiet threat that promised they were in over their heads. Derek didn't back down. He couldn't. not in front of his men. "Or what?" he snarled, grabbing a chain from his belt and letting it clink ominously against the ground. Jake tilted his head slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll see." Derek lunged forward, swinging the chain, and the bikers surged toward Jake. The fight was on, but they had no idea what they were walking into. The chain whipped through the air with a sharp clang, aimed directly at Jake. But Jake was already moving. With practiced precision, he sidestepped the attack, grabbing the chain mid-swing and twisting it out of Derek's hand in one fluid motion. The gang leader stumbled back, his smirk replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The other bikers froze for a split second, long enough for Jake to step back and drop the chain to the ground with a heavy clatter. "Your first mistake," Jake said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "was thinking I'm just some old guy." The gang erupted into shouts, their hesitation replaced by anger. Two bikers charged at Jake, one wielding a crowbar, the other swinging a broken bottle. Jake stayed rooted, his body loose but poised. The man with the crowbar swung hard, but Jake ducked low, sending the biker's momentum into a spin. Before the man could recover, Jake stepped in and delivered a calculated strike to his solar plexus. The biker crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. The second man, emboldened by his comrade's failure, lunged with the broken bottle. Jake caught the man's wrist mid-thrust, twisting it just enough to disarm him without breaking it. The bottle shattered on the ground. A quick shove sent the biker stumbling into a nearby rack of snacks, the shelves crashing down around him. Eddie stood frozen behind the counter, his mouth open in shock. How are you?" "Stay behind the counter," Jake said, his tone firm but steady. "And don't call the cops. Not yet." Derek's voice roared above the chaos. "Get him, you idiots!" The remaining bikers hesitated, their bravado shaken, but the gang's numbers gave them courage, and they spread out, surrounding Jake in a loose circle. Jake's eyes darted between them, calculating angles, obstacles, and openings. Years of military training surged to the forefront of his mind, each move deliberate and efficient. One biker feinted toward Jake's left while another lunged from the right. Jake spun, using the momentum of the attack to throw one man into another. The two collided, crashing into the metal shelves with a loud clang. Another biker charged from behind, swinging wildly. Jake dropped low, sweeping the man's legs out from under him. The biker hit the ground with a groan, clutching his knees. Derek, still standing back, watched in disbelief as Jake dismantled his crew with ease. "What the hell are you?" he muttered under his breath, his confidence faltering for the first time. Realizing his crew was losing, Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out a small knife. His voice was a low growl as he addressed Jake. "You think you're tough, huh? Let's see how tough you are with a blade in your gut." Jake locked eyes with him, unshaken. "If you're smart, you'll put that away before you hurt yourself." Derek lunged, the blade glinting under the gas station's flickering lights. Jake didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, catching Derek's wrist with one hand while driving his elbow into the gang leader's ribs. Derek gasped in pain, the knife clattering to the ground. Jake twisted Derek's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "Second mistake," Jake said quietly. "Thinking a weapon gives you an edge." Jake released Derek with a shove, sending him sprawling onto the asphalt. The gang leader scrambled to his feet, clutching his side, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. The bikers who were still standing helped their fallen comrades to their feet, their confidence shattered. Jake stood in the center of the chaos, untouched and unshaken. "You're out of your league," Jake said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet menace. "You walk away now and this ends here. Push it any further and you won't like what happens next." Derek spat on the ground, his pride refusing to let him back down completely. "This isn't over, old man." He motioned for his crew to follow him, his tone bitter. "Let's go." The bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life. As they sped off into the night, Derek turned back, pointing a finger at Jake. "You're gonna regret this. We'll be back." Jake watched them disappear into the darkness, his expression unreadable. He turned to Eddie, who was still shaking behind the counter. "Lock up and go home," Jake said quietly. But what if they come back?" Eddie stammered. Jake's eyes hardened. They will. The faint hum of the motorcycles faded into the distance, leaving an eerie silence behind. Jake picked up the chain Derek had dropped, studying it for a moment before tossing it aside. "This isn't over," Jake muttered to himself, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The roar of motorcycle engines shattered the stillness of the night. Jake had been expecting this. He stood near the gas station's entrance, his arms crossed, watching the headlights approach from the highway. The gang was back, and this time, they had reinforcements. From the shadows, Eddie peeked through the window, his face pale. "There's more of them this time," he whispered, panic thick in his voice. Jake didn't turn. "I told you to go home." Eddie hesitated. "And leave you here alone? No way." Jake glanced over his shoulder, a small smirk breaking his otherwise serious demeanor. "You've got guts, kid, but I don't need backup. Just stay out of sight." Derek pulled up to the gas station with twice as many bikers as before. His bruised ego from the earlier encounter was evident in his snarl. This time, he wasn't taking any chances. "All right, boys," Derek barked as he dismounted. "This old man thinks he's some kind of action hero. Let's show him what happens when you mess with the wrong crew." The gang cheered, brandishing weapons, chains, bats, even a crowbar or two. They spread out, circling the station like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Jake didn't wait for them to make the first move. He had already scoped out the station and turned it into a makeshift fortress. Nearby shelves were emptied to create barricades, motor oil was spilled strategically to create slippery patches, and loose tools were hidden in strategic spots. As the gang approached, Jake turned to Eddie. "You see that back room?" Eddie nodded. "Go in there, lock the door, and don't come out until I say so." "But what about you?" Eddie asked, his voice trembling. Jake gave him a reassuring nod. "This isn't my first fight." The bikers began smashing windows and shouting taunts. "Come on out, old man," Derek hollered. "Or are you too scared now that the odds aren't in your favor?" Jake stepped into the doorway, his silhouette framed by the flickering lights inside the station. "You've got one chance to leave," he called out, his voice calm but firm. Derek sneered. "You think we're falling for that tough guy act again? Get him!" Two bikers rushed forward, but as soon as their boots hit the slick patch of oil Jake had prepared, they slipped and crashed to the ground. The rest of the gang burst into laughter until Jake stepped forward, swinging a length of pipe he had pulled from the station's storage. The first biker barely had time to react as the pipe struck his leg, sending him sprawling. The second scrambled to his feet only to catch a quick jab to his stomach. "Third mistake," Jake muttered, stepping over the two groaning men. The gang surged forward, their earlier hesitation replaced by fury. Jake moved like a machine, ducking swings and striking with precision. He used the station's narrow aisles to his advantage, forcing the bikers to come at him one at a time. One grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it wildly. Jake sidestepped, yanked the extinguisher from the man's hands, and sprayed a blinding cloud of foam into the advancing bikers' faces. Eddie watched from the back room, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "He's like a one-man army," he whispered to himself. Derek, realizing brute force wasn't working, motioned for his men to fall back. He pulled out a walkie-talkie and spoke into it. "Bring in the truck." Jake heard the rumble before he saw it, a large flatbed truck rolling down the highway toward the station. Its headlights blazed and its cargo bed was loaded with bikers wielding heavier weapons. Jake's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a gang of troublemakers anymore. This was a coordinated assault. The truck came to a screeching halt in front of the station, and Derek stepped forward, holding a Molotov cocktail. He lit the rag, grinning wickedly. "You've had your fun, old man," Derek growled. "But this is the end of the road for you?" Jake's eyes flicked to the Molotov, then back to Derek. Calm as ever, he said, "You don't know who you're messing with." The rag on the Molotov burned brighter as Derek wound up to throw it. The flames from the Molotov danced in Derek's hand, reflecting off his twisted grin. The gang closed in tighter, their confidence bolstered by the reinforcements. Jake, however, stood still, his face calm as if he'd seen this all before. "You're really going to burn down a gas station?" Jake asked, his tone sharp but measured. "You think you'll make it out alive if those tanks go up?" Derek's grin faltered for a moment as his eyes darted toward the gas pumps, but his bravado quickly returned. "You're bluffing." Jake didn't reply. Instead, he took a calculated step back into the station, disappearing into the shadows. The bikers advanced cautiously, the air heavy with tension. Derek gestured for two of his men to follow Jake inside while the rest kept watch outside. The first biker stepped through the shattered door, his bat raised. The inside of the station was eerily quiet, the dim emergency lights flickering overhead. "Where'd you go, old man?" the biker growled. From the corner of the room, a faint metallic sound echoed. The biker turned just in time to see a wrench hurtling toward his chest. He stumbled back, gasping for air, as Jake emerged from the shadows. The second man swung wildly with a crowbar, but Jake ducked under the blow and delivered a swift elbow to his jaw. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Eddie, watching from the back room, whispered under his breath, "How is he doing this?" Derek paced impatiently, gripping the Molotov tighter. "What's taking so long?" he muttered. One of his lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar running across his cheek, looked uneasy. "Maybe we should just cut our losses, boss. This guy's not normal." Derek snarled, shoving the man. "Don't tell me you're scared of some washed-up soldier." As if on cue, a loud crash came from inside the station. The gang turned to see Jake walking out, calm and unscathed. Behind him, the two bikers who had gone in were sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain. Derek's grip on the Molotov tightened, his knuckles white. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Jake's voice was cold, controlled. "I'm just someone who's had enough of bullies like you." Enraged, Derek raised the Molotov and hurled it toward the station. The bottle spun through the air, flames trailing behind it. Jake moved quickly, grabbing a fire extinguisher from behind a counter and spraying it in a wide arc. The foam engulfed the Molotov mid-flight, extinguishing the flames before the bottle hit the ground with a harmless shatter. The gang erupted in shouts, their frustration boiling over. Derek pointed at Jake, his face twisted in rage. "Take him down." The remaining bikers charged, weapons raised. Jake retreated toward the pumps, using the terrain to his advantage. He sidestepped blows, using his surroundings to block attacks and disable his opponents. One biker swung a chain at Jake's legs, but Jake caught it midair, yanking the man off balance and sending him sprawling into the dirt. Another tried to corner him with a bat, but Jake countered with a quick jab to the ribs, disarming the man in seconds. Eddie, unable to sit idly by, emerged from the back room with a wrench in hand. "Jake!" he shouted, tossing the tool. Jake caught the wrench mid-throw and used it to deflect a crowbar aimed at his head. With a swift spin, he sent the crowbar flying and knocked its wielder unconscious. The bikers, who remained standing, exchanged uneasy glances. Their confidence was rapidly unraveling. Derek, now visibly panicking, pulled out his phone and barked into it. "Get us back up, now!" Jake, breathing heavily but still composed, took a step closer. "Who are you calling, Derek?" "Your boss? What's he going to think when he finds out you couldn't handle one man?" Derek hesitated, his phone trembling in his hand. Jake continued, his voice low and deliberate. "You think I don't know what this is really about? You're not just a gang causing trouble. You're muscle for someone bigger, someone who wants this place gone." Derek's eyes darted around nervously and Jake smirked. "Thought so." The sound of sirens cut through the night, growing louder by the second. Derek spun around, shouting at his men, "We're out of here!" A convoy of police cars roared into the station's parking lot, lights flashing. Officers poured out, guns drawn, shouting orders. Derek and his gang scrambled for their bikes, but Jake wasn't done. He grabbed Derek by the collar and slammed him against a gas pump. "You tell your boss," Jake growled, "that I'm not someone to mess with. If he wants to finish this, I'll be waiting." Before Derek could respond, the officers surrounded them, dragging the gang members to the ground and cuffing them. Eddie stepped out cautiously, his face a mix of awe and relief. You stopped them." Jake shook his head. "Not yet." As the police began loading the gang into their vehicles, one officer approached Jake. "We've been after this crew for months. How'd you manage to hold them off?" Jake glanced at the officer, his expression unreadable. Just doing what needed to be done. The officer nodded, then gestured toward Derek. This one mentioned something about a bigger operation. You know anything about that? Jake's eyes narrowed. Maybe. As Jake walked back to his truck, Eddie called out, "Wait! What happens now?" Jake paused, looking back. "Now I go find the real problem." He climbed into his truck and started the engine, the faint glow of the horizon hinting at the next challenge waiting for him. The gas station was silent now, the distant glow of police lights fading into the horizon. Jake leaned against his truck, his eyes scanning the desolate road ahead. His calm exterior masked the storm brewing inside. Derek's panicked call for backup and the cryptic warnings about someone bigger had confirmed Jake's suspicion. This wasn't just a gang of troublemakers. Eddie approached cautiously, his hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets. "Jake, what did he mean? About someone else being behind this?" Jake exhaled slowly. Derek and his gang weren't acting alone. Someone sent them here. Someone who wants this place, and probably this whole area, under their control. "But why a gas station?" Eddie asked. Jake glanced toward the pumps, his sharp mind piecing things together. "It's not the station, it's the location. This highway connects to every major route in and out of the state. Whoever controls this area controls a lot of movement, legal and illegal." Jake opened the door of his truck and pulled out a weathered satchel. Inside was a secure satellite phone, one of the few remnants of his military days. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A gruff voice answered after a few rings. "Winters, didn't think I'd hear from you again." "Times change," Jake replied. "I need intel on a crew operating near Route 79. They're working for someone, and I need to know who." There was a pause. "Route 79? That's no small-time operation. You sure you want to get involved in this?" "I'm already involved," Jake said firmly. The voice sighed. "I'll see what I can dig up, but be careful. If it's who I think it is, you're poking a very big bear." Jake ended the call, his jaw tightening. As Jake prepared to leave, a car pulled into the station. An older man stepped out, his face lined with worry. It was Tom Grayson, the station's owner. "Eddie called me," Tom said, walking up to Jake. "Said you saved this place tonight?" "Thank you," Jake nodded. "You've got bigger problems than just those bikers." Tom sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I know. I've been getting pressure for months now. They want me to sell this place, and when I said no, the threats started." "Who's they?" Jake asked. Tom hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I don't know their names, just that they're connected to a man named Victor Kane. Big shot in the area. Construction, logistics, you name it. Word is he's got ties to some dangerous people." Jake's expression darkened. "Kane. You know him?" Tom asked. Jake didn't answer directly. "Get yourself some extra security, Tom. Things are going to get worse before they get better." Across town, Victor Kane sat in a lavish office, sipping whiskey as he reviewed a report from his men. The failed gas station assault hadn't gone unnoticed. Derek's call had alerted him to Jake's interference, and Kane wasn't pleased. "One man stopped all of you?" he asked coldly. One of his lieutenants, a burly man named Harlan Fawn, nodded reluctantly. "He's not just any man. Derek said he's ex-military, special forces maybe." Kane leaned back in his chair, his sharp features illuminated by the glow of the city lights outside. "If he's special forces, he's a problem. Find out everything you can about him, and make sure he doesn't interfere again." Harlan hesitated. "And if he does?" Kane's smile was thin and cruel. "Then make sure he regrets it." Jake didn't head home. Instead, he drove to a nearby motel, parking his truck in the shadows. He opened his satchel again, this time pulling out a tablet connected to an encrypted network. Years of military intelligence work had left him with more than just combat skills. It had given him access to resources most people didn't even know existed. He searched for Victor Kane, and the results were exactly what he expected. Construction mogul, logistics tycoon, and philanthropist on the surface, but beneath the polished exterior, there were whispers of smuggling operations, illegal land grabs, and violent tactics to silence opposition. As Jake dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Kane had been targeting small businesses and properties along Route 79 for months, forcing owners to sell or face the consequences. The gas station was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Jake paused when a familiar name appeared in Kane's network. Mark Reiner. A corrupt contractor Jake had tangled with during his final military mission. Reiner had escaped justice then, and now he was working with Kane. Jake leaned back, his mind racing. This wasn't just a fight for a gas station anymore, it was personal. Jake's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was Eddie. "Jake, you need to get back here," Eddie said, his voice panicked. "What's wrong?" Jake asked. "It's Mr. Grayson," Eddie replied. "A couple of guys just showed up at his house. They said they were with Kane, and they're not leaving." Jake's hand clenched into a fist. "Stay where you are, I'll handle it." Jake started his truck, the engine growling to life. He knew this was a trap, but he wasn't about to let Kane's men intimidate innocent people. As he sped toward Tom's house, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were about to rise, and that this time Kane himself might be waiting for him. Jake arrived at Tom's house to find two black SUVs parked out front. The headlights illuminated the driveway, where two men leaned casually against the vehicles, arms crossed. Both were burly and radiated menace, their holstered weapons visible beneath their jackets. Jake parked his truck a short distance away and approached on foot, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He kept his hands visible, but his body language firm, calm, in control, and not to be underestimated. One of the men noticed him and straightened. "This ain't your business, old man. Walk away." Jake's voice was even. "You're trespassing. That makes it my business." The man chuckled, motioning toward his partner. "You hear that? Grandpa thinks he's a hero." Jake didn't flinch. "If you want to walk out of here without a limp, you'll get in those SUVs and leave." The second man stepped forward, pulling a baton from his jacket. "I don't think you get how this works. Kane wants this property, and he gets what he wants." Jake moved faster than either man expected. He grabbed the baton mid-swing, twisting it out of the attacker's hand and sending him sprawling with a calculated shove. Before the other man could react, Jake delivered a sharp kick to his knee, dropping him to the ground. The driver of one SUV jumped out, pulling a pistol. Jake darted behind the other vehicle for cover as the man shouted, "You're dead!" Before the situation could escalate further, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. The would-be gunman cursed under his breath and jumped back into the SUV. "We'll be back!" he shouted as the vehicles roared to life and sped away. Jake stepped out from behind the car, watching them retreat. A police cruiser pulled into the driveway moments later, its lights flashing. Out stepped Officer Carla Reyes, one of the few honest cops Jake had encountered since returning to civilian life. "Jake Winters," she said, her hands on her hips. "You always manage to find trouble." Jake gave a faint smile. "Trouble finds me. These guys work for Kane." Reyes nodded grimly. "We've been building a case against him for months, but if he's sending muscle to intimidate people, he's getting desperate." Jake crossed his arms. "Then let's push him over the edge." Back at the gas station, Jake, Eddie, and Reyes huddled together, going over their next move. Jake had dug up enough intel to know where Kane's operation was headquartered, a sprawling logistics warehouse on the outskirts of town. "This ends tonight," Jake said. "We take this straight to Kane's doorstep." Eddie frowned. "You're not seriously thinking of going in there alone?" Jake looked at him. "I won't be alone. Reyes will coordinate with her team to keep the police on standby. We just need to make enough noise to force Kane's hand." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Jake's lips curled into a smirk. "Leave that to me." Jake arrived at the warehouse under the cover of darkness. He moved silently, using his training to bypass the patrolling guards. He planted small, non-lethal explosives on key vehicles and equipment, setting the stage for chaos. With a press of a button, the charges detonated in controlled bursts, sending plumes of smoke and flames into the night sky. Alarms blared as workers and guards scrambled, shouting orders. Jake stepped into the chaos, his figure illuminated by the flickering flames. The guards spotted him and charged, but Jake was ready. He dispatched them with the same precision and efficiency he'd shown at the gas station, using the confusion to his advantage. Inside the warehouse, Jake found Kane in an office, barking orders into a phone. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Jake said, stepping into the room. Kane spun around, his face a mix of shock and fury. "Winters," he growled. "You've made a big mistake." Jake tilted his head. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." Kane pulled a gun from his desk, but Jake was faster. He knocked the weapon aside and delivered a series of blows that left Kane gasping on the floor. "You think you can stop this?" Kane spat, blood trickling from his lip. "I've got connections. You take me down, 10 more will take my place." Jake crouched down, his voice cold. "Maybe, but tonight, it's just you." Kane's phone buzzed on the desk, its screen lighting up with messages, evidence of his criminal activities. Jake picked it up and handed it to Reyes, who had just entered with her team. "This is all the proof you need," Jake said. Reyes nodded. "It's over, Kane. You're done." Weeks later, the town had returned to a semblance of peace. The gas station was open again, and Tom Grayson had installed new security measures. Eddie had taken a job as Tom's assistant, his confidence growing every day. Jake stood by his truck, watching as life moved on. Reyes approached him, a folder in hand. "Thought you'd like to know," she said. "Kane's network is dismantled. His men are behind bars and the town's safe for now?" Jake nodded. "Good work." Reyes smiled. "You're not sticking around, are you?" Jake shook his head. "This town doesn't need me anymore." As Jake drove off, the horizon stretched ahead. A new road, a new challenge. But for now, he was content knowing that justice had been served. The camera lingers on Jake's truck as it disappears into the distance. A voiceover encourages viewers to reflect on the story's themes of courage and resilience. Sometimes standing up against the odds takes more than strength. It takes heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. If you love this story of courage and justice, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping tales.